The gym was loud that evening, filled with the thud of gloves against heavy bags, the squeak of sneakers sliding across mats, and the sharp sound of trainers shouting instructions. People were sweating, pushing their limits and testing their strength. It was the kind of place where everyone came to prove themselves, to get stronger and to be respected. The smell of sweat and leather filled the air, mixed with the faint echo of laughter in the corners. In the middle of the gym, a man stood out from the crowd. He was a black belt, proud of his skill and reputation. Everyone knew him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and walked with the confidence of someone who believed he could never be beaten. Many looked up to him, but others whispered about his arrogance. He loved to show off, loved to remind everyone that he was the best fighter there. To him, the gym wasn't just a place to train. It was his stage. That evening, while others focused on their drills, the black belt noticed a woman standing quietly in the corner. She was stretching, preparing her body, but she wasn't loud like the others. She didn't boast, didn't try to draw attention. She simply moved with calm control, almost like she belonged in a different rhythm than the noisy gym around her. She had dark brown skin, her hair tied back neatly, and her face showed no sign of nervousness, only quiet focus. The black belt smirked when he saw her. To him, she looked out of place. He thought she was just an outsider who wandered in, maybe someone curious about the gym, maybe someone trying to test herself where she didn't belong. He turned to a group of trainees standing nearby, and with a loud laugh he said, "Hey, should I give her a little lesson? Let's see if she can even throw a punch." The group chuckled, shaking their heads. Some whispered, others nudged each other, waiting to see what would happen next. The black belt enjoyed the attention, and the more he felt people's eyes on him, the more he wanted to turn it into a show. He raised his voice, making sure everyone could hear him. "You there?" he called out, pointing at the woman. "Yeah, you. How about a spar? Just for fun. Don't worry, I'll go easy on you." The gym suddenly grew quieter. People stopped hitting the bags. Even the trainers paused. Everyone loved drama, and this was drama. All eyes turned toward the woman. In the corner, she slowly lifted her head and looked at him, her face calm, almost expressionless. She gave a small smile, not nervous, not offended, just polite. At first, she didn't say anything, and for a moment it looked like she might walk away. But the black belt wasn't done. He clapped his hands together and laughed loudly. "Come on, don't be shy. We all want to see if you can handle a little fight. Or are you scared?" Some people chuckled, others whispered, unsure if this was fair. A few even looked uncomfortable. They knew the black belt had a reputation for mocking beginners, for using his skill to embarrass people instead of teaching them. But no one dared to say anything against him. The woman finally stood up straight, her smile still gentle, but her eyes sharper now. She didn't raise her voice, didn't try to match his energy. Instead, she spoke softly, but clear enough for everyone to hear. "If that is what you want," she said, "I don't mind." The room seemed to freeze for a second. No one expected her to agree. Some laughed louder, thinking this would be entertaining. Others raised their eyebrows, curious about her courage. The black belt's grin widened. He bowed dramatically, mocking her, and said, "Well then, let's give the gym a little show." The crowd began to gather around the sparring ring. People left their training, wiping sweat from their faces, eager to watch. A circle formed. Phones were pulled out, some ready to record. The trainers shook their heads, but didn't stop it. Even they wanted to see what would happen. The woman calmly walked toward the ring. She didn't rush, didn't show any fear. Her steps were steady, measured. She slipped off her shoes, tied her hair back tighter, and stepped inside the ropes. She bowed respectfully, her movements precise, as if she understood the true spirit of martial arts. The black belt, on the other hand, waved to the crowd, soaking in the cheers and laughter. He bounced on his feet, shadowboxing in an exaggerated way to make people laugh. "Don't blink," he shouted to the crowd. "This won't last long." But the woman didn't respond. She just looked at him, her eyes calm and focused, like she was studying him carefully. The room, once filled with laughter and noise, slowly began to quiet. Something about her composure unsettled a few people watching. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't joking. She was ready. And in that silence, the first spark of suspense was lit. The fight that was meant to be a joke was about to become something no one in that gym would ever forget. The crowd stood closer now, forming a circle around the ring. Some leaned against the ropes, their faces excited, waiting for a quick and funny show. They thought the woman had walked into something far above her level, and the idea of seeing a black belt play with her made them grin. For them, this was going to be entertainment. The black belt bounced lightly on his feet, his grin wide and confident. "Don't be nervous," he said loudly so everyone could hear. "I'll keep it easy. Just a warm-up for me." The audience chuckled, and a few clapped, encouraging him. He was used to being the center of attention, and this was his stage. The woman stood calmly in the opposite corner. She wasn't showing fear or excitement. Her body was relaxed, her breathing slow and steady. Her eyes followed his movements, not in panic but with focus. She gave a small, polite smile when he tried to joke, but she didn't speak. It was as if she was waiting for something only she understood. Her calmness irritated him. He wanted her to look scared, to show nerves, to play her part in his show. Instead, she was silent, steady, and almost unreadable. That only pushed him to turn up the mockery. He bowed dramatically again, almost touching the floor, making people laugh. "Shall we?" he said, gesturing like a theater actor instead of a fighter. The woman tied her hair into a tighter knot, adjusted her stance, and simply nodded. That single gesture carried more weight than any words. The crowd hushed for a moment, curious now. When the bell rang, the black belt wasted no time. He moved quickly, circling her with light steps, raising his hands and throwing playful jabs into the air just inches from her face. He wasn't trying to hit her, not yet. He was putting on a show, making it look like he was teasing her, letting everyone laugh at her expense, but she didn't flinch. Her eyes never left his shoulders, his arms, his legs. She was watching him closely, every movement, every fake punch. Her face remained calm, her breathing even. The crowd chuckled again, whispering among themselves. "She doesn't even know what to do," one voice said. "He'll finish this in seconds," another added, but not everyone was laughing now. A few in the back, older fighters who had seen many matches, began to notice something different. The way she stood, the way her hands rested in position, the way her eyes followed his movements, it wasn't the stance of a beginner. The black belt grew more aggressive, still smirking, still pretending. He lunged forward with a half-hearted punch, expecting her to flinch back in fear. Instead, she didn't move. She stood firm, her eyes sharp. She tilted her head slightly, watching his arm pass by, like she was measuring his speed. The crowd laughed again, but the laughter was quieter. Now, something about her stillness was unsettling. It didn't look like fear. It looked like patience. The black belt stepped back, raising his hands higher. "Come on, throw something," he taunted. "Let's see what you've got." He lowered his guard slightly, daring her to make the first move. He wanted her to look foolish, to swing wildly so he could dodge and embarrass her. But she didn't take the bait. She simply smiled politely again, as if she knew exactly what game he was playing. Then she shifted her feet, just a small adjustment, but it was enough to make a few sharp-eyed fighters in the crowd exchange glances. They could see it now, her balance, her readiness, her discipline. She wasn't a random woman who wandered into the gym. She was something else entirely. The black belt tried again, this time stepping in with a playful kick. She moved slightly, her body tilting just enough to let it pass without touching her. No panic, no rush, just smooth control. The crowd gasped quietly. It was subtle, but everyone saw it. The black belt's grin faded just a little. For the first time, doubt touched his face. He straightened, circling her again, this time with sharper eyes. He could feel something was off. She wasn't nervous, wasn't clumsy, and she wasn't easy prey. The silence in the gym grew heavier. The laughter had nearly stopped. The crowd leaned closer, sensing something unexpected. Phones that were recording shifted, people holding them steadier now, realizing this might not be a quick joke after all. The woman, still calm, finally spoke. Her voice was soft but firm. "You asked for this," she said, her eyes never leaving his. "I will not be responsible if you regret it." Her words cut through the air like a blade. The gym went quiet, truly quiet this time. No laughter, no whispers, just silence and the sound of breathing. The black belt's smirk flickered, and for the first time, he looked uneasy. He clenched his fists, tightened his stance, and decided it was time to stop joking. He was going to show her his real skill to put her back in her place. But deep down, in the pit of his stomach, something told him this wouldn't be as easy as he thought. The fight was no longer a joke. It was about to become very real. The gym felt different now. Just minutes earlier, laughter filled the room, but that laughter had drained away. In its place was a heavy silence, the kind that made every sound louder, the squeak of the ropes, the shuffle of feet, the quick breath of the fighters. Everyone's eyes were locked on the ring, waiting for what came next. The black belt, once so full of confidence, paced in a circle. His grin was gone, replaced by a tight jaw and narrowed eyes. He had been joking before, but her calmness, her composure, had shifted something inside him. No one had ever looked at him that way in the ring, without fear, without doubt, almost as if she already knew how this fight would end. Still, he couldn't back down. Too many people were watching. His pride was on the line, and his reputation as the gym's strongest fighter was at stake. He threw his shoulders back, forcing himself to laugh again, though the sound was thinner now. "All right," he said, loud enough for the crowd. "Enough warming up. Let's see if you can handle the real thing." The woman stood in her corner, silent, her stance steady. She didn't rise to his words. Instead, she shifted her feet again, lowering her body slightly, her hands coming up just enough to guard. The sharp-eyed trainers watching from the back recognized it instantly. This was no random stance. It was practiced, disciplined, the kind that came from years of training. The black belt launched forward suddenly, throwing a quick jab aimed at her shoulder. The crowd gasped, expecting her to stumble, but she didn't. Her hand moved smoothly, deflecting his fist with the back of her wrist, guiding it harmlessly away. It was so fluid, so natural, that for a moment it looked like she had hardly moved at all. The gym erupted with murmurs. "Did you see that?" one whispered. She blocked him like it was nothing. The black belt growled under his breath. He stepped in again, this time with more power, a low kick aimed at her thigh. She pivoted on her heel, letting the kick slice through empty air, and at the same time she brushed his leg with a soft push, just enough to make him stumble slightly. The crowd gasped louder. Phones zoomed in. No one was laughing anymore. The black belt's face flushed red. He couldn't believe she was dodging him so easily. He had expected her to flail, to swing wildly, to prove herself a joke. Instead, she was calm, steady, and almost patient. He attacked harder now, with a flurry of punches, his fists a blur. The crowd leaned in, their eyes wide, but every time he struck, she moved just enough. A turn of her body here, a shift of her arm there. She wasn't blocking everything with brute strength. She was redirecting, using his power against him, making his attacks look clumsy. For the first time in his career at the gym, the black belt felt like the clown instead of the showman. Sweat rolled down his face, his chest rising and falling. Faster. He was working hard. But she wasn't even breathing heavy. The crowd had gone from laughter to shock and now to awe. "She's trained," someone muttered. She has to be. Finally, the black belt paused, stepping back, panting slightly. His fists stayed up, but his eyes darted nervously. He had underestimated her. This wasn't going the way he planned. He thought he would humiliate her, but instead, he was the one looking foolish. The woman tilted her head, her eyes calm but unyielding. For the first time, she spoke during the fight. "Are you finished playing?" she asked softly. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried through the silent gym like thunder. The black belt's face twisted with anger. He couldn't stand the humiliation. "No!" he snapped. "I'm just getting started." He lunged forward again, faster, angrier, this time aiming for her ribs with a heavy punch. But before it could land, she stepped aside, her body turning gracefully. In one fluid motion, she caught his wrist, twisted slightly, and forced him to stumble past her. The move was so fast and clean that the crowd gasped again, louder than ever. The black belt spun around, his eyes wide. He knew that move. That wasn't something a beginner could do. That was advanced. The crowd was electric now, buzzing with whispers, gasps, and disbelief. Trainers exchanged knowing looks. They understood what was happening. This woman wasn't some random person who wandered into the gym. She was highly skilled, maybe even more skilled than the man who thought he ruled the place. The black belt clenched his fists tighter, his pride burning. He couldn't stop now. He wouldn't let himself be beaten in front of everyone. He charged. Again, his punches wild with frustration, but the more he swung, the more foolish he looked. She dodged, blocked, redirected. And all the while, her face stayed calm, her breathing steady, her movements controlled. For the first time, the crowd began to cheer, not for him, but for her. "Let's go," someone shouted. "Show him." The black belt froze, realizing the crowd had turned. He wasn't the hero anymore. The woman, with her quiet strength and skill, had captured them all. He grit his teeth, his pride screaming inside him. He raised his fists again, ready to give everything he had. But in his heart, a seed of doubt had already been planted. For the first time, he wasn't sure he could win, and the woman, she hadn't even started fighting back yet. The air inside the gym grew heavier, almost like everyone was holding their breath at once. The fighters leaning against the ropes were silent now, their eyes wide, their bodies tense. What had started as a joke was no longer funny. The black belt, the man they all thought unbeatable, was being pushed into a corner by someone no one had expected. The black belt wiped sweat from his brow with the back of his glove. His chest rose and fell faster, his breath sharp. He had sparred against tough opponents before, people who had forced him to dig deep. But this felt different. This woman was not rushing, not flailing, not trying to impress the crowd. She was calm, waiting, watching him as if she had all the time in the world. Her eyes stayed locked on him, steady and sharp, studying his every move. She didn't need to show off. She let her silence do the talking, and it unnerved him more than any taunt could have. The crowd sensed the shift. The whispers started again, this time not mocking her but questioning him. Why hasn't he hit her yet? She's reading him like a book. She's trained. She has to be. The black belt couldn't take it anymore. He threw himself forward, launching a heavy roundhouse kick aimed at her side, the sound of his leg cutting through. The air echoed across the gym, but at the last second, she stepped back, her movement smooth and precise. His kick missed completely, making him stumble slightly as his balance faltered. Before he could recover, she shifted forward, her palm rising just enough to touch his chest and push him back. It wasn't hard enough to knock him down, but it was enough to show that she could have done more if she wanted to. The crowd gasped. Even the trainers, usually reserved, leaned forward. That single push said everything. It was proof that she wasn't just defending. She had the power to attack. Whenever she chose, the black belt's face turned red. He hated the feeling of being toyed with. He rushed again, this time punching wildly. his strikes fueled by frustration instead of skill. The woman's body moved like water, flowing around each blow, blocking here, sidestepping there. Her hands flicked out at just the right moments, parrying his attacks with effortless grace. It looked like a dance, one she was leading, and he was stumbling to keep up. The silence in the gym grew deeper. No one laughed now. The only sounds were the heavy breathing of the black belt and the soft swish of her clothes as she moved. Every eye was locked on the ring, every phone still recording, every spectator frozen in place. Finally, she moved in, closer. For the first time she struck, not with a heavy blow, but with a sharp, controlled tap to his shoulder that spun him halfway around. It was light, almost gentle, but the precision stunned the crowd. She wasn't showing off her strength, she was showing her control. The black belt stumbled, caught himself, and turned back toward her. His pride screamed inside him. He could feel his reputation slipping away with every second this fight continued. He needed to win. He had to prove himself. But deep down, something else was stirring, fear. He charged again, throwing a powerful straight punch aimed at her face. This time, she didn't just dodge. She stepped into his strike, her arm snapping up to block and redirect it. In the same motion, she twisted her body and pressed her fist lightly against his ribs. It was a controlled strike, stopping just short of impact. But everyone knew what it meant. If she had wanted, he would have been winded on the mat. The crowd exploded with gasps and shouts. She had him, someone yelled. That could have ended it. The black belt froze, his eyes wide. For the first time in his life inside that gym, he realized he wasn't in control of the fight. He wasn't the stronger one. She stepped back, calmly, lowering her fists, giving him space. Her eyes met his, steady and calm as ever. She didn't need to say anything. Her silence was louder than words. The crowd erupted, not in laughter but in applause and cheers. They were no longer watching a joke. They were witnessing something incredible. The black belt clenched his fists again, his pride refusing to let him stop. He tried to laugh, but his voice cracked slightly. Not bad, he muttered, though it sounded more like an admission than a compliment. The woman only bowed her head slightly in acknowledgement, then raised her stance again, ready. Her movements were still measured, her breathing calm, her face composed. It was clear now she had only been testing him until this point. The trainers exchanged serious looks. Some of them whispered quietly, recognizing the kind of skill she displayed. She wasn't just some casual fighter. Her discipline, her balance, her precision, it all pointed to years of training, maybe even mastery. The black belt tried to steady his nerves, but the seed of doubt inside him had grown roots. He could feel the crowd's eyes on him, not cheering for his victory, but waiting for his downfall, and for the first time, in a very long time, he wondered if he might lose. The woman took a step forward, her presence filling the space between them. The crowd hushed again, waiting for the next move. Everyone could feel it. The fight was no longer about pride or jokes. It was about to turn into something unforgettable. The joke had ended. The real fight had only just begun. The room felt charged, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Sweat dripped from foreheads, but no one wiped it away. Trainers, beginners, and even the spectators who had just come for their own workouts were glued to the ring. Every eye followed the two figures inside, knowing they were watching something rare, something unforgettable. The black belt adjusted his gloves, his chest heaving, his pride burned hotter than the sweat stinging his eyes. He had spent years building his reputation in this gym. He was the one everyone looked at with respect, sometimes fear. He was the fighter no one dared to mock, yet here he was, on the edge of losing control to a woman no one had ever seen before. He couldn't accept it. He wouldn't. Enough games, he shouted, his voice echoing through the gym. He lunged forward with a powerful spinning kick, putting all his strength into it, the kind of strike that had knocked out plenty of opponents in the past. but the woman wasn't there. At the last second, she stepped aside, her body gliding just beyond the reach of his leg. The air cracked with the force of his missed strike, but she had already moved. In one smooth motion, she tapped his leg with her palm, disrupting his balance. He stumbled, his foot slamming awkwardly against the mat. The crowd gasped. Some clapped, others shouted in disbelief. It wasn't just that she dodged him. It was the way she made it look effortless, as if she knew what he would do before he did it. His face flushed, his chest rising and falling faster. The gym that once fed his pride was now feeding his humiliation. Every failed strike, every stumble, was turning him into the joke he had tried to make her, and she still hadn't truly attacked. The woman moved forward now, slowly, deliberately. Her steps were calm, but the weight behind them was undeniable. Her eyes didn't waver. They locked onto him, steady as stone, and it made him feel like he was the one being hunted. He roared with frustration, throwing a flurry of punches. His fists blurred through the air, striking at her head, her ribs, her legs, anything he could reach, but she flowed around them like water, blocking, redirecting, dodging. Her body bent and twisted in perfect rhythm, not a wasted movement, not a hint of panic. Then it happened. As he threw one more heavy punch, she stepped in. Her hand snapped up, catching his wrist in midair. Gasps filled the gym. Before he could react, she twisted, pulling him forward off balance. Her other hand rose, pressing just below his chin, and in one sharp motion she stopped. Her fist frozen an inch from his throat. The crowd shouted as if struck themselves. They had seen it. Everyone had. She could have finished him in that instant. She had complete control. The black belt's eyes widened. For the first time in years, real fear flickered across his face. He felt the cold truth in his chest. If she had wanted, that fight would have ended right there. But she let go. She released him gently, stepping back with grace, lowering her hands. Her eyes never left his, though, and her silence screamed louder than any victory shout. The gym erupted with voices now. Cheers, claps, shouts of disbelief. Some spectators shook their heads, muttering, "She's better, she's stronger." Others yelled, "Did you see that? She could have ended it." The black belt stumbled back, panting, his fists trembling. At his sides, his pride screamed at him to keep fighting, but his body knew the truth. He was outmatched. Still, he couldn't stop. "Again!" he barked, his voice hoarse. He raised his fists, though his arms felt heavy, his legs shaky. The woman tilted her head slightly, almost sadly. She didn't want to humiliate him. She wasn't fighting to prove anything to the crowd. She was only here because he had forced. Her hand. She stepped forward once more, her stance low, her movements smooth. This time she didn't wait for him to attack. She struck first. Her hand snapped out, a clean strike to his shoulder, spinning him sideways. Before he could recover, she swept her leg lightly against his, tripping him just enough to send him stumbling to the mat. He caught himself on one knee, his breath ragged. The gym roared again. Phones shook as people tried to capture every second. The black belt had been dropped to the ground. Red-faced and gasping, he pushed himself back up, his pride the only thing dragging him to his feet. His eyes burned with desperation. He swung one last time, a desperate, clumsy strike, but she moved with the same steady grace, catching his arm and turning him until he lost his balance completely. This time, she placed her palm firmly against his chest and pushed. He fell back onto the mat, flat on his back, staring up at the lights above the ring. The silence that followed was deafening. The fight was over. Everyone knew it. The woman stepped back, her breathing calm, her face composed. She bowed slightly, showing respect not just to him, but to the spirit of the fight itself. Then she turned toward the stunned crowd, who erupted into thunderous applause and cheers. The black belt lay on the mat, pride shattered, chest heaving. He had wanted to make her a joke, but she had silenced the entire gym with nothing but skill, composure, and discipline. She didn't smile, didn't boast, didn't mock. She simply stood tall, her presence radiating quiet power, and in that moment everyone understood. The real warrior was never the loudest in the room. The gym was no longer the same place it had been when the challenge began. Moments ago, the air had been filled with laughter, jokes, and loud taunts. Now all of that had been replaced by stunned silence and wild cheers. The sound of hands clapping and voices shouting filled every corner of the room. Some were chanting her name, though most didn't even know it. They were simply swept away by what they had witnessed. The black belt sat on the mat, sweat dripping down his face, his chest rising and falling with exhaustion. His pride stung more than his body. He had been defeated, no, humbled, in front of everyone he once ruled over. People who once admired him were no longer clapping for him. They were clapping for her. For the first time, he wasn't the star of the gym. He forced himself to stand. His arms felt heavy, his legs shaky, but his pride refused to let him stay down. He wanted to believe he could still fight, still prove himself. But deep down, he knew the truth. His opponent wasn't just skilled, she was on a different level. He raised his fists weakly, his voice hoarse. "I'm not done." The woman turned her head slightly, her expression calm but almost sorrowful. She hadn't come here to humiliate him. She hadn't come to prove anything to strangers, but his arrogance, his need to turn her into a joke, had left her no choice. Now she stood facing him, steady, silent, her stance still firm. The crowd grew quiet again, waiting to see what would happen. Some were whispering, "He should stop, he's done." Others said, "He can't fight anymore. Look at him." But the black belt pressed on, taking slow, unsteady steps toward her. He swung once more, a sluggish punch, his arm moving more from pride than strength. The woman blocked it gently, catching his wrist with almost effortless ease. She held it for a moment, looking him in the eyes, then let go. She was giving him a choice: stop now and leave with dignity. But he shook his head, refusing to back down. He stumbled forward again, his punches sloppy, his movements wild. Each time she dodged or blocked, never striking him hard, only redirecting, guiding him away. It was as if she was teaching him in front of everyone, showing that true strength wasn't about aggression, but control. The crowd began to murmur louder, their loyalty shifting completely. "She's letting him live this down easy," one said. "She doesn't want to hurt him." The black belt collapsed to his knees again, his body no longer able to carry the weight of his pride. He stared at the mat, his fists trembling. For a moment the room was silent, watching to see what he would do. Then, slowly, he bowed his head, not in defeat, but in respect. Gasps spread across the crowd. The arrogant fighter, the man who mocked beginners and turned the gym into his stage, was bowing to her. The woman stepped back, her face softening slightly. She gave a small bow in return, showing the same respect. The crowd erupted, this time louder than ever. The sound of clapping and cheering shook the walls. Phones recorded every second, capturing the moment that no one would forget. The black belt pushed himself up again, his body weak, but his spirit lighter. He stood tall, though. His pride had been broken. Looking at her, he finally spoke honestly, his voice quiet but clear. "You're incredible, incredible." The woman didn't reply. She didn't need to. Her silence carried more meaning than words. She had proven herself not through boasting or shouting, but through calm skill, patience, and humility. The trainers at the back exchanged nods. They had seen many fighters, many challengers, but it was rare to see someone like her, not just skilled, but disciplined, composed and unshaken even in the face of mockery. The black belt turned toward the crowd. Their eyes were no longer on him. He could feel the shift, the loss of his old power. But for the first time, instead of bitterness, he felt something else. Relief. Maybe this was the lesson he had needed all along. He bowed once more, this time to the whole gym. "Respect her," he said, his voice steady now. "She's the real fighter here." The crowd cheered again, louder, their voices carrying respect, not only for her skill, but for the way she carried herself. She had silenced the whole gym, not with arrogance, but with dignity. The woman stepped out of the ring slowly, her face calm, her body still steady, as though the fight hadn't even taken effort. She walked past the crowd, who moved aside, their eyes following her in awe. Some clapped her on the shoulder as she passed, others simply bowed their heads in quiet respect. The black belt remained in the ring, watching her go. His pride was bruised, his ego shattered, but his heart felt lighter. For the first time, he understood what true strength meant. It wasn't about loud victories or making others look weak. It was about control, humility, and respect. The gym would never forget this day, the day a woman walked in silently, accepted a challenge meant to humiliate her, and left as the fighter who silenced them all. The gym was buzzing, even after the fight ended. The sound of clapping still echoed off the walls, and whispers filled every corner. No one could stop talking about what they had just witnessed. Some still shook their heads in disbelief, others replayed the fight in their minds, and many kept glancing at the woman as though trying to understand who she really was. She had already stepped out of the ring, moving with the same calmness she carried throughout the fight. Her face was not proud or boastful. She didn't raise her hands in victory, didn't smile for the cameras. She simply walked to the side of the room, picked up her bag, and stood quietly, as though nothing extraordinary had happened. That, more than anything, left people speechless. The black belt remained in the ring. He stood in the center, still breathing hard, his pride wounded, his body heavy with fatigue. But his eyes told a different story now. They weren't filled with arrogance anymore. They weren't even angry. Instead, they carried something new, understanding. The crowd slowly began to drift closer to the woman. At first, no one spoke, afraid to break the spell. Then a young trainee whispered, "Who are you?" His voice trembled with both respect and curiosity. The woman looked at him kindly but said nothing. She simply gave a small smile and adjusted her bag strap. That silence spoke louder than words. The trainers exchanged looks, their expressions serious. One of them, a seasoned coach with grey at his temples, stepped forward. "That was no ordinary sparring," he said softly, almost to himself. "Her control, her discipline, that takes years of training, years." The others nodded. They knew they had just witnessed a fighter far beyond what their gym usually saw. Back in the ring, the black belt raised his hand. The crowd turned, waiting. He pointed toward her, his voice rough but honest. "I mocked her," he admitted, the words heavy but freeing. "I thought it would be a joke. But she showed me what real strength looks like. Respect her." The crowd erupted in applause, again louder than before. For the first time, his words weren't about himself, they were about her. And it felt right. Some of the people who had laughed at her earlier looked down, ashamed. They had joined in the mockery, certain she would fail. Now they understood how wrong they had been. The woman finally spoke, her voice soft but clear. "Strength is not about who shouts the loudest," she said. "It is about control, respect, and knowing when not to strike." The silence that followed was heavy with meaning. Even those who had trained for years knew they had just been given a lesson, not just in fighting, but in life. The black belt bowed deeply toward her. His pride no longer mattered. His respect for her was real. "Thank you," he said, his voice steady now, "for showing me." The crowd clapped again, but this time it wasn't wild. It was respectful, steady, almost ceremonial. It felt less like applause for entertainment and more like recognition for something sacred. The woman bowed back, then turned toward the door. She didn't wait for attention, didn't crave recognition. She had come in quietly, and she would leave quietly. That was her way, but before she could step out, a young girl in training clothes ran up to her. Her eyes sparkled with admiration. "Will you teach me?" she asked breathlessly. "Please." The woman looked down at her, surprised. For the first time, a small, genuine smile spread across her face. She placed a gentle hand on the girl's shoulder and said, "Learn first to respect yourself, then you will already be strong." The girl nodded eagerly, her face glowing. As the woman left the gym, the atmosphere remained heavy with awe. People turned to each other, whispering about what they had seen. They knew this story would be told again and again, about the day. A black belt tried to humiliate a woman, only to be humbled himself. The black belt stepped out of the ring at last, his shoulders heavy but his heart lighter than before. He walked over to the trainers and bowed his head. "I've been teaching wrong," he admitted. "I thought strength was about showing off. She proved me wrong." One of the trainers placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then you have already learned the most important lesson," he said. The black belt nodded slowly. He knew his journey wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning again. He had to rebuild himself, not as a showman, not as a fighter who needed to be admired, but as a true martial artist who respected the craft. The gym that night didn't just witness a fight. They witnessed transformation. A room that had once cheered arrogance now honored humility. A crowd that had expected a joke walked away with respect. And though the woman's name was still unknown to most, her presence had left a mark deeper than any punch or kick ever could. The next day, people would return to their training. Bags would thud, sneakers would squeak, and gloves would smack against pads. But in the corners of the gym, whispers would continue. "Do you remember her? The woman who silenced the whole gym, and no one would forget." The next morning, the gym felt different. People arrived early, whispering to one another, still replaying the fight in their minds. It was as if the walls themselves carried the memory of what had happened. Every corner buzzed with the same question: who was she? No one had forgotten the calm black woman who had stepped into the ring. She had walked in quietly, accepted a challenge meant to humiliate her, and left the entire gym in stunned silence. Her victory was not only in skill, but in the way she carried herself, with dignity, humility, and respect. The trainers talked among themselves. They had seen many fighters over the years, some talented, some arrogant, some humble, but none had left an impression as deep as she had. One trainer said softly, "She didn't just fight him, she taught all of us." The younger trainees were the most inspired. They had laughed at her at first, following the black belt's lead. But now their laughter felt like shame. Instead, they spoke about wanting to train harder, to fight with respect instead of ego. Some of them even tried to mimic her movements, copying the calm way she stood, the balance in her steps, the precision in her hands. The black belt himself was quieter than anyone had ever seen him. Usually, he filled the gym with his voice, his jokes, his swagger, but that day he moved like a different man. He bowed more often, spoke less, and when asked about the fight, he didn't make excuses. He only said, "She was better. I needed to see that." His change surprised many. Some had admired his arrogance before, but now they admired his honesty even more. It wasn't easy to admit defeat, and yet he had done it openly. For the first time, he began to look like a true martial artist, not just a loud fighter. The story of the fight spread quickly. Videos recorded on phones traveled beyond the gym. People replayed the moment when she dodged, when she countered, when she placed her fist near his throat and stopped. They shared it online, writing captions like, "Humility beats arrogance. This is real strength." Within days, the clip gained attention. Some called her the silent warrior. Others said she embodied the true spirit of martial arts, but she remained unknown. No one even knew her name. She hadn't stayed to explain, hadn't asked for fame. She had simply walked away. For the gym members, though, she was unforgettable. They couldn't stop talking about her. They trained harder, not to show off, but to improve. The atmosphere of the gym shifted from one of pride and mockery to one of respect and discipline. The black belt, once the loudest voice, became quieter, more focused. He began to train alongside beginners instead of mocking them. He corrected their stances, encouraged their efforts, and reminded them of the lesson he had learned. "Don't underestimate anyone," he would say, "and never mistake silence for weakness." Weeks passed, but her presence lingered. Every time someone stepped into the ring, they thought about her. Every time arrogance started to creep into training, someone would whisper, "Remember the woman who silenced the whole gym." It became a reminder, a story told to every newcomer. One evening, as the sun set outside and golden light filled the gym, the black belt stood in front of the group. He bowed deeply, something he had never done before. His voice was steady, humble. "I lost a fight," he said, "but in losing, I gained respect. I learned that strength isn't about showing off or mocking others. Strength is about control, humility, and honor." The crowd listened quietly, some nodding, others reflecting. It was clear that the fight had not only changed him, it had changed them all. As for the woman, no one knew if she would return. She remained a mystery, a passing storm that left the ground transformed. But whether she ever came back or not didn't matter. Her lesson had already been planted in every heart that had witnessed the fight. The young girl who had asked her for guidance carried those words with her every day. "Respect yourself first, and you are already strong." She trained with new determination, her movements sharper, her focus deeper. In her, perhaps, the woman's legacy would live on. That night, as the gym lights dimmed and the last bag stopped swinging, the silence carried a new kind of weight, not of arrogance, but of respect. The fighters bowed to one another before leaving, a small change, but a meaningful one. The story would be told for years, the day a black belt challenged a woman as a joke, and she answered with silence, skill, and humility. The day the loudest man in the gym was humbled by the quietest person in the room. The day respect returned to the place where arrogance once ruled, and though she walked away without looking back, her impact stayed. She hadn't just silenced the gym, she had awakened it. The echoes of the fight lingered long after the woman had walked out of the gym. No one touched the heavy bags. No one went back to their sparring. It was as if time itself had paused. People stood in small groups, whispering about what they had just witnessed, replaying every moment in their minds. The black belt remained in the ring for a while, staring down at his hands. His gloves trembled slightly, not from exhaustion, but from the weight of realization. He had been the loudest voice in the gym, the one who believed his strength gave him the right to mock others. Now he was the man who had been silenced by someone he underestimated. Slowly, he climbed out of the ring. The crowd parted as he walked through, his head bowed, his once proud shoulders heavy. He didn't hear laughter anymore. He didn't see admiration in their eyes, but he also didn't see mockery. Instead, he saw something different, respect for her, and maybe, just maybe, pity for him. Across the room, some of the younger trainees were still wide-eyed. One boy whispered to another, "She made him look helpless." The other shook his head. "No, she made him look human." That was the truth. She hadn't humiliated him with cruelty. She had humbled him with skill and grace. The trainers, men, who had built their careers on teaching discipline and respect, exchanged knowing glances. One of them finally said, "We needed this." His voice was low, but everyone nearby nodded. They knew the gym had drifted too far from its roots, turning into a place of bravado instead of honor. That woman had reminded them of what martial arts truly stood for. Days turned into weeks, but the memory of that fight didn't fade. Videos spread online, showing her calm movements, her precise counters. The moment her fist had stopped just short of his throat, The clip was shared with captions like, "Never underestimate anyone," and "True strength is silent." People outside the gym began to ask the same question: who was she? But she never came forward. She didn't return to the gym, didn't claim fame from her victory, and didn't explain who she was. She remained a mystery, an unforgettable shadow who had walked into their world for one night and changed it forever. Inside the gym, though, her presence never left. The black belt, once known for his arrogance, changed the most. He no longer strutted around mocking beginners. Instead, he started training beside them. When a nervous new member stepped into the gym, he encouraged them. Instead of laughing, "Don't be afraid," he said softly one evening. "Even the strongest fighters started where you are." His voice was different now, quieter, steadier. It carried humility. The younger fighters noticed the shift. They copied the woman's stance when they practiced. They spoke about her calm eyes, her controlled strikes, her silence. She had become a legend among them, a standard to live up to. One evening, a group of students gathered around the black belt. "Will she ever come back?" one asked. The black belt looked down, thinking. "I don't know," he admitted. "But whether she does or not doesn't matter. She already gave us what we needed." "What's that?" another asked. He smiled faintly. "Respect." The trainers began teaching differently too. They focused less on power, more on discipline. They repeated her words. "Strength is not about who shouts the loudest. It is about control, respect, and knowing when not to strike." That line became a motto, painted on the wall where everyone could see it. The gym was no longer the same place. It was quieter now, but stronger. Fighters trained with focus, not arrogance. Beginners entered without fear. And whenever someone felt pride swelling too much, someone would whisper, "Remember the woman who silenced the whole gym." As for the black belt, he carried the lesson deepest. He still trained hard, but not to prove himself to others. He trained to rebuild, to grow, to honor the art he had once taken for granted. He often replayed the fight in his head, not with bitterness, but with gratitude. Losing to her had been the best thing that ever happened to him. Months later, a young girl stood in the middle of the gym, her fists trembling as she faced her first sparring session. She looked scared, ready to give up. The black belt knelt beside her, his voice calm. "Don't be afraid of losing," he told her. "Strength isn't about beating others. It's about respecting yourself." The girl nodded, her eyes shining, with courage, and in that moment, the woman's legacy lived on, not in her presence, but in the change she had sparked. The fight had ended long ago, but its impact never would. The story would be told again and again. The black belt who mocked a woman, the woman who fought with silence, and the gym that learned what true strength really meant. And though she had left without looking back, her spirit stayed. She hadn't just silenced the gym, she had awakened it.